It's very clear that diet plays a major role in the overall health of the individual. In particular, most of the research has focused on diets, whether you have a low or a high fat diet, and some of the metabolic consequences of those. For example, high fat diets seem to manifest type 2 diabetes and obesity by changing the microbial populations within the gut. Right, so there were some really prominent papers that came out starting in about 2004 that have led up for the past, 9 years now, taking a look at some of these things. And the associations that have been made about a high-fat diet is that it changes, the relative abundance of this one phyla called the Firmicutes, which tends to enhance energy harvesting, meaning it becomes more efficient at taking up fat. And because there's an excess or abundance of this fat, typically then it's redeposited at the adipose tissue, so it promotes obesity. Obesity is kind of in the cyclic relationship with systemic inflammation, although the changes to Firmicutes have also shown that there's an increase or ability for these gram-negative bacteria to lyse or break apart and release lipopolysaccharide, which then breaks down the walls of the intestines and then leaks into systemic circulation. And lipopolysaccharide, being this major pro-inflammatory molecule, also predisposes the individual to obesity and insulin resistance and diabetes. And so Caney and his group have looked at that. So the literature is definitely very supportive of these changes occurring in systemic health that are associated with the changes in relative abundance of these particular phyla. What you alluded to earlier is not known is some of the direct pathways that are involved in changing this. So that's a really open and exciting area to investigate, is which metabolic pathways seem to be turned on and off by the changes in these gut bugs. Right, so the same group, Caney, who eventually, or who not eventually, but who showed that there's this increase in lipopolysaccharide and the change in the gut bugs that predispose, also looked, I believe, at probiotic supplementation and did find that it is very protective, especially of the intestinal epithelial integrity through what they call this GLP-2 dependent mechanism, which protects the gut barrier function and reduces the systemic inflammatory response. So it does, and I know he's had several, I believe, a couple of papers after that, which I haven't looked into, suggesting that pro and prebiotics will help. I mean, technically they're cultures, they're bugs, and the idea is to introduce these healthy bugs into the gut to kind of alter those bacterial communities to promote, short chain fatty acid breakdown and adequate or inadequate, or I guess you should say adequate energy harvesting as opposed to inadequate energy harvesting where you over harvest the fat. So, it's pretty novel to think and to see the literature that supports pre and probiotics altering the microbial populations to promote health. Besides obesity and diabetes, I mean, there have been particular species of microbes in the gut that have been linked to neuropathologies such as Alzheimer's and ADHD, for example, and IBD or irritable bowel syndrome and some intestinal and colon-related cancers. There's even some bugs out there that have been linked to cardiovascular disease. So these gut bugs and these populations are linked to several inflammatory-based diseases, which tends to kind of be at the focus of a lot of these chronic diseases. So, that's why it'll be really neat to look at some of these physiological pathways and maybe see how they're interconnected. These different bugs affect, maybe similar inflammatory pathways, which then, can be targeted, maybe even pharmaceutically. So, there are ways absolutely to use the diet to manipulate it. It's a very cyclic relationship, as we always talk about in our lab meetings, that, what the host does is going to affect the bugs, and I think it's kind of initiated there, and then the bugs kind of change, and that kind of predisposes the host to certain things, and the host maybe continues that behavior, and so it's kind of this cycle that, persists unless there's some sort of, pharmaceutical intervention or exercise intervention or even dietary intervention, because it has been shown that, when you reduce calories or go back to a low-fat diet, that your gut bugs will change. They respond to you.